Welcome back to Morning Joy, where truth matters. I'm your host, Keith Downey, and today we are thrilled to have a special guest joining us once again, Jacob Stein, the creative force behind Crux Stationalis, an inspiring apostolate that brings the beauty and history of Rome's ancient churches to Catholics around the world. And he's also here to tell us about his brand new podcast, Jubilee Year, Roman Station Church Pilgrimage, just in time for the 2025 Jubilee Year. So whether you're a liturgy lover, a history buff, or just curious about deepening your faith, you're in for a treat. Jacob, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Keith, for having me again. It's always a joy to come on. It's a new endeavor, the podcast. Had to figure out a way to create new, exciting content. And so it's available on Spotify and wherever else you get podcasts. And then also I'm re-putting them onto YouTube. So what I do, it's sort of more of a conversational piece, as opposed to the visual content, which I've created throughout the years. So it's always linked back. The Roman station churches, as you said, are visiting the most ancient churches of Rome. And the beautiful thing, something that I'm really discovering as I'm doing the podcast, because it's more focused on the spoken explanation of this journey, is I'm discovering sort of connections, or I'm rediscovering connections that I've had throughout the years to see the sort of wisdom of this Roman devotion, which really goes back to the early centuries of the church, with the legalization of Christianity at the beginning of the 4th century, with the Edict of Milan in 312 by Emperor Constantine, which brought then the building of the Cathedral of Rome, St. John Lateran, which was the Roman station church for Sunday. It brought the eventual building of St. Peter's Basilica over the tomb of St. Peter. It brought St. Paul's Basilica over the tomb of St. Paul. And these are all places that we go and discover, because the early Roman Christians, for the first 2.5 centuries of the church in Rome, were seeing their fellow Christians martyred. And so the devotion of this witness in union with the sacrifice of Christ is what they feel. They feel it in their blood. They feel it just in the streets of Rome. And as Tertullian said, the blood of the martyrs became the seed of the church. And that's something which we still are experiencing today, as Christians throughout the world are experiencing persecution more so than we ever have in the life of the church. And it's something we're not focusing on in the media. We're not seeing it as much as we are, or as we should. But it's happening on a daily level, and especially in the last couple of days, it's been happening. And so
Syria,
it ties, yeah. And so there's some news networks which are covering it in a more extensive way, and I would encourage people to go and explore that. This ties us back to our roots and helps us understand sort of the sentiment of the Church of Rome. This pilgrimage, we go from one tomb of a martyr to another tomb of a martyr every day. And it was something which, as I said, goes back already to the 4th century and was really codified by the 6th century, the 500s. And then the tradition grew, more churches were added on because liturgy was different then, but it was really the Pope going from one station church to the next with the faithful of Rome. And as you can see, and as you're getting really good at saying Crux Stationalis, which is the name that I've given to the apostolate, but they would gather behind what is called the Crux Stationalis, a station cross, which confuses people because, of course, especially in Lent, we're always talking about the stations of the cross, but this is different. This was a massive crucifix that each little neighborhood in Rome had their own. So they would gather behind that, and then there would be each one with their deacon and the sort of structures of that neighborhood, and then they would go in procession from one collect church where everyone would gather together, like we have the opening prayer of the Mass is also called a collect. And then they would say that prayer, and then they would sing the Litany of the Saints. But why were they singing the Litany of the Saints? Because they were going from tombs of the saints to another saint over the course of Lent. And so that's where this tradition goes. And so every time I hear the Litany of the Saints throughout the year, I'm reminded of, these tombs, these actual tombs where these saints, or the saints that we hear in the first Eucharistic prayer, also called the Roman canon. These are some of these saints: Saints Cosmas and Damian, Saints John and Paul, Saint Agnes. And I created this. Some of your listeners and viewers have seen me on your show, but for those of who are new to this topic, I created this because I've experienced so much from the Romans, from my friends who have done this, and I've become friends with, there's this group of a pontifical academy that's responsible for the cult of the Roman martyrs, and they organize these stations, we call them, from station liturgy, station mass, stations, which means standing attentively at, like a soldier does, at the tomb, or like the soldier does, and we're doing it at the tomb of a martyr. And it sort of orients the Lenten pilgrimage, but also there's a lot of fruit, especially, and it even relates to our day-to-day. Pope Francis is in the hospital. Yesterday we visited St. Peter and James. And so the scriptures tell us that the church was praying for Peter. Well, the church is praying for the pontiff right now, which tells us that it should give us this living reality of connecting throughout the centuries. So it's a tradition which has all of the fruit for the centuries, but it also gets added onto each year. And I think we lose sight of that when we are practicing our faith, when we're going to liturgies, when we're praying the Stations of the Cross. And so we forget that we're also participating in the life of the church. And that should give us hope. It's the Jubilee of Hope, which I think is a very poignant word that the Holy Father has chosen for this Jubilee. We need a lot of hope in the world, and we also need it in our personal lives, in the daily struggles. We get tied up, and these sorts of pilgrimages, there's so many people coming to Rome for the Jubilee. The city it's funny, as you were mentioning St. Peter the Spaniard, you said he was a hermit in Rome. I said, how does he be a hermit in Rome? The city is bustling, which is very good. And my day-to-day job, I work right by the Vatican. So I see all day long the crowds of the groups going to enter the Holy Door at St. Peter's. And so we take on a new, the Romans, we get to take on a pilgrimage ourselves during these days. And I try to put that then experience online, on YouTube videos, on the podcasts, on photos, so it's exciting that I get to share that with people. And it's always beautiful when I get the comments that say, I feel like I'm walking through the churches of Rome, or thank you for this. It really helps my Lenten pilgrimage. It gives people a context for, instead of being a sort of ethereal fasting and almsgiving and praying, it roots us in the physical, tangible reality of what the church is, what our prayer life is, what pilgrimage is, which is an analogy for our whole life. So that's a really exciting aspect.
What I appreciated too is that you give us a little bit of insight into what you'd be looking at. So I think it was yesterday's episode, you were talking about the statue of Moses that Michelangelo essentially created, and how he changed something about it, and I can't remember specifically, but he put
he turned the head.
Yeah,
he turned the head as a sort of snub to Julius II, because I think the history is that he wasn't getting paid well, and the Pope wanted him. Julius II is responsible for the kind of flourishing of what we would now call the Vatican museums and the Sistine Chapel. And so he wanted a massive mausoleum with 40 statues if you go and see the video that I have on my YouTube channel, you'll see there's probably like 12 statues. And one of them is this Moses statue, which is very iconic, very strong, which also helps us understand the sort of history of our faith and the reliance of that we should have on the, you know, the patriarchs of the Old Testament, and this importance of the law transformed by Christ. But Moses is like buff. So everyone who likes, you know, all these Chad memes and everything like that, they should look at Moses. But what Michelangelo did, usually if you're going to change a statue, you cut off, like you detach the head and turn it. Instead, he carves into the side of the face of Moses's face, and then also put in the front a self-portrait of himself. And so it's just, there's like little things like that which are comical but also political, and it kind of adds to the experience of exploring Rome kind of on the ground.
Yeah, it kind of brings humanity into it all. Like, we're all a little bit of a passive aggressive, and that was kind of taking it to another level there. But that's so cool. And it's really exciting that you're kind of giving everybody a way to dive into this tradition, especially if we aren't able to make the trip to Rome, because it's a crazy time of year, being the Jubilee year. So, you know, we have the websites in the show notes. It's passioxp.com. But make sure to also check out any of the social medias, Crux Stationalis. So thanks so much, Jacob, for joining us. It's been a pleasure to have you back on.
Thanks for having me, Keith.
Absolutely. And that is it for Morning Joy, where truth matters. It flew by this morning, my goodness. But hey, we're going to be back same time tomorrow morning. That's 6 a.m. Central, 7 a.m. Eastern. Wednesday morning. Can't even believe it's almost midway past the first week of Lent. But now there's a couple ways we can go forward. If we're going to be for listening on the radio is what I'm trying to say. You can stay for the Holy Mass. Please pray for us. We will continue to pray for you. Otherwise, we're about to transition on over to our after show clubhouse. All on social media. Just search Morning Joy Radio. And we'll do a debrief of the show and just have fun with you. That's the whole thing of it. But this is us truly parting ways. God bless, and make it a joyful day.
This has been Morning Joy, where truth matters, hosted by Keith Downey. Take some joy with you today. Visit grnonline.com/joy to listen again, share a segment, or answer the question of the day. That's grnonline.com/joy.